Berserk is one of the most popular and influential manga in the industry. It pioneered and utilized a lot of tropes and techniques that are considered standard to this day, and has gone on to inspire many different series. But with all the perfect reviews, it sparks a question. Before we talk about Berserk, let's talk about how things get overrated in the first place. A common yet seemingly valid argument against calling something overrated is that there has to be a reason for it to be rated so high. Something can't magically get overrated. This is mostly true. However, something being overrated stems from bias. There are two different types of bias. Well, there's many, but all biases fall under one of two categories: conscious bias and unconscious bias. Conscious bias means you positively or negatively bias something or someone on purpose. An example of conscious bias is if I were to receive medical information from a doctor and then receive opposing medical information from a random kid at a playground, for example, I would most likely take the advice from the doctor. Unconscious bias is the exact opposite. It is having a positive or negative bias on something or someone without realizing it. Let's apply this to Berserk. Berserk's first volume was initially released in November 26, 1990. So a lot of it is pretty old. The most infamous part of the manga is of course the eclipse. When the manga chapters containing the eclipse were first published, people were astonished. Over the decades, it received incredible reviews on how perfect and tragic it was. But an argument that one could make is that since the eclipse was released, there has been more, better writing. But because of all the reviews for when it first came out, anyone who heard the reviews and read the books had the set mindset that Berserk was a masterpiece even before reading it. That no matter what content the chapters contained, it had to be good. With more and more people getting into Berserk, more and more people also feel the need to feed the flame that is the positive reviews. But more recently, some people have started to call Berserk not only overrated, but just plain mid. There's been many complaints about Berserk's writing, but also complaints about the positive reviews. Some claim Berserk is good but outdated, and that it doesn't deserve the continuous praise up to the state that it receives. That since it was released, the tropes it pioneered have been used and improved upon. Let's take a look at the reasons why people love Berserk, specifically the eclipse. We'll talk about Griffith because he has received a lot of praise for being a perfect villain. Griffith is an amazingly well-written character. From the beginning, we know exactly what his end goal is: to rule over a kingdom conquering an entire continent. He doesn't just turn evil though. Something happens. He is on a path to achieve his dream when Guts leaks. It is semi-confirmed that Griffith had feelings for Guts, but without Guts, the Band of the Hawk lost one of their biggest strengths. Griffith gets into trouble and is sentenced by the king to be tortured. It is only a year later, after Guts' return, that they free him. But he's different. He has a helmet on his head that looks inseparable, he has no tongue so he can't speak, he's scarred and bruised, and he is severely skinny. The torturing completely changed Griffith. He lost the behelit, essentially losing the one thing that kept his dream possible. He watched his hopes and dreams shatter in front of him and saw it as purely Guts' fault for leaving. When he triggered the eclipse, he was immediately given the sense of hope back to him. He became a member of the God Hand and incarnated as an evil version of his past self. His new incarnation was named Femto. Because Griffith, or Femto, believed his torturing to be 100% Guts' fault and that Guts had Casca fall in love with him, he wanted them to pay. And because Femto is technically pure evil, he will destroy Guts and Casca before killing them both. I'm sure you know what Griffith does if you read it. He kills the Band of the Hawk and forces Guts to watch him, do something to Casca. Before he kills them both, Skull Knight saves them both by cutting through space and time and capturing them. This makes Griffith the biggest supervillain that one could possibly imagine. After Griffith does what he did to Casca, she's brainwashed into believing Griffith is right and to hate Guts, making Guts hate Griffith all the more. Not only do we receive a single very clear villain, but also a pure driving motive and desire for Guts to continue. Like I said, many people say that newer media is superior to Berserk, but I honestly couldn't find anything that makes us hate a person so much, while creating a semi-clear end goal to defeat Femto. Berserk does an exceptionally great job at inflicting emotions on anyone who reads it. It has possibly the most realistic portrayal of trauma and tragedy in any fictional media I've ever read or watched. Okay, but this just spans 70 to 100 chapters of the manga, which is under a third of the story. Many people think the rest of the story is overrated as well. But a lot of the rest of the story is the same or similar in the fact that it pioneered many things, perfecting it the first time. With all this praise, Berserk is still not perfect in my opinion. While it's true that its ability to make very complex characters while still having crystal clear end goals is outstanding, there are some complaints that many people had with Berserk. Many people complain about one thing: the excessive nudity. Of course, anyone who reads Berserk should be well aware of the nudity, as it is a part of the story, but a lot of it is unnecessary. Many people have stated that if some of the nudity, specifically female nudity, was taken out, the story would be the same. As this redditor put it, Casca being basically naked for no reason during the entirety of the wild fight is one of the few criticisms I have of the series. Her clothes seem to me to have been torn in a particularly outlandish way for the sole purpose of exposing her ass and tits for the readers to look at. Berserk deals in very dark themes, such as sexual violence, gore, death, despair, the list goes on. People all the time say if you don't like nudity, then don't read Berserk. While this is true, and it's also true that the Griffith Casca scene was brutal but very necessary, people claimed it felt like they couldn't go 10 chapters in the Golden Age arc without seeing Casca, or any other female character for that matter, naked. In the opposition's defense, a lot of times it did tie into the story, but there were instances where it simply didn't affect the story at all. But this didn't make the story immediately bad, it's just a small complaint. I would say that I agree with this point. Another big complaint people have is Guts. Whoa. What? Guts is literally one of the most praised protagonists ever, right? Well, people continue to play into the fact that Berserk is overrated. People complain about Guts being too excessively edgy, that a lot of the way he acts is too cliche, and that he isn't a super complex character. This isn't true. First of all, Guts is a complex character. I'm not going to ramble on about how Guts is a complex character, but if you've read the manga and understand it well enough, you will know that Guts is in fact complex. But saying he is cliche at times seems pretty valid. An argument against this statement is that Berserk was literally one of, if not the first story to ever popularize or use this trope. And while many people say this trope is overdone now, back when Berserk was released, this now considered trope was almost entirely original. But this argument doesn't make the claim that Guts is too edgy and cliche entirely invalid. People agree that when Berserk came out it was outstanding, but now that the trope is done so many times, Guts gets lost in a sea of edgy characters who follow a similar trope. Maybe at a time it stood out, but not anymore. Let's argue against this. Think of it like this. It's true that a lot of stories have utilized similar tropes. None were identical to that of Berserk while still remaining good or even standard. Many stories took parts of Guts' character but had originality. Guts is basically the ultimate culmination of all these edgy characters. Maybe there are more well-written characters than him, but you can't complain about the edginess when Berserk literally near perfected it. The people who complain about Guts being edgy probably shouldn't read Berserk, similar to those who can't handle violence and nudity. The last complaint I'll be talking about is deception. What I mean is that some people say the story makes you think it's good. It makes Griffith seem like a supervillain when really he's just a basic villain. Plain simple writing disguised as incredible writing. Very few people have said Griffith isn't complex. It's just his actions are unpredictable. One person I talked to about Berserk once said, just because a character shocks the audience by doing something massive and unpredictable, doesn't mean he has a complex reason as to why. All Griffith wanted to do was to rule over a kingdom, and he kind of got what he wanted. There's no deep writing, his goals and actions have been simple from the start. All Kentaro Miura did was obstruct us from certain information to make it more shocking. I kid you not, this is almost word for word what one of my friends said to me. When he said it, I had to think for a second for an argument opposing it, but it was at exactly the time that I had to head back home, so I didn't get to prove him wrong right away. Was he truly right? Well, kind of. Griffith did have a clear end goal, to rule over a kingdom, and it was simple. But this dream became more and more corrupt over time as he literally sacrificed his own humanity to achieve it. Everything Griffith endured led up to the eclipse in a massive climax. Sure, Femto may be considered pure evil, but he still had the thoughts and motives that Griffith had. Not only this, But the thing that makes complex characters interesting is making them unpredictable. It's obstructing information about the person so the audience slowly understands what kind of character they are. The audience isn't meant to know what a character is going to do, but instead the audience can figure out and understand why a character performed a certain action after the fact. It's how writers like Kentaro can make such captivating and interesting writing. Everything that my friend mentioned earlier is not a reason to why it's bad, it's what makes it good, which is kind of ironic. So Berserk is not overrated, right? Everything I've talked about was to prove it wasn't overrated. But that's not to say some people still overrate it. While it's true Berserk's writing is phenomenal, sometimes people say it's better than it is. In some of the less good parts of the manga, people still praise it not because it's good, but because of the massive well-receivement of the greater part of the series. Berserk, in my opinion, is not the best story out there, but everything that it tried to achieve, it succeeded and near perfected it. There's no story quite like Berserk that I could find, and probably won't be for a long time to come. With all the information gathered, we can finally answer the question. Are all the reviews for Berserk the result of a chain reaction with good reviews? Is Berserk's writing too cliché and edgy? Is Berserk overrated? No. Berserk is mostly not overrated. It deserves all the praise it receives, not just for the writing, but because of the fact that it pioneered many tropes and perfected them the first time. Thank you guys for watching this Peak Stasis video. This video is the third video ever uploaded to Peak Stasis, so if you enjoyed it, be sure to check out my other videos and subscribe for future videos just like this one. Thank you all, and I'll see you in the next Peak Stasis video.